And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, does feline urine provide more electrolytes than your average sports drink? And with comedian Bob Saget's life tragically cut short, where am I going to find amazing farm animal relationship life hacks? And now, the podcast host who always shares his life hacks no matter the usefulness or relevancy, Pete Dominic.
Yes, that is right, Pete Co. Thank you for another amazing introduction to today's program. And hello, my friends. I have two excellent guests joining me today. Great conversations with both Maura Quint. It's Maura Mondays, and before that, for the second time on the show, Professor Claire Potter joins me, and she is so brilliant and articulate and nuanced. I know I use that word too much, nuanced, but great conversation with both Maura Quint and Professor Claire Potter coming your way. Lots of news to talk about. I hope you had a good weekend. COVID is raging. Sidney Poitier, and of course, as you just heard, Bob Saget passed away. That's right, Danny Tanner from Full House, for those of you that don't know the name Bob Saget. I told my wife, Bob Saget died, and then a few minutes later, she said, you didn't tell me Danny Tanner died. I was like, good God. But either way, Bob was a friend of mine. I think it's fair to say a guy who was very good and kind and generous and thoughtful to me. We did stand-up comedy together. He joined me at SiriusXM. He joined me here on this podcast, and he was great. He was great to me on social media. He was great to me in real life. I went and saw his Broadway show. That show was called Hand to God, and boy, was he good in it, and it was a great show. And Bob was a father and a husband and just a guy who is a monster, a legend, a friend to everybody. I mean, he was friends with all the big dogs, from Rodney Dangerfield to Gary Shandling to just about everybody. But Bob was also friends with everybody like that was below him. You know, like he wasn't just friends with the folks who were as famous or more famous than him, and very few people were more well-known than Bob Saget. But Bob was friends with all comics. Bob was a comics comic. He brought a lot of guys on the road to open for him, spent a lot of time with him. I reached out to Tim Wilkins, who was opening for him this past weekend when Bob died, and because that's what I think you got to do. But I am, of course, heartbroken over it, but I've put it in a box so I could do today's show because it broke right before my conversation with Maura Quint, and I tweeted about it. And if you have the desire, you want to do something for Bob, he was a huge, huge supporter of the Sclerodoma Association. I've tweeted that out, and he would love, his sister passed away of that disease, and he always raised money for it, and so anyway, I will talk more about Bob. I might even try to reach out to a whole bunch of comedians because this guy was just he was the leader. He was the moral leader in many ways of the comedy community, and he was just so widely and deeply respected. And I might try to put together a show just reaching out to the comedians I know, telling stories about Bob. I think that would both be entertaining, and I know Bob would love that. So I'll think about and share more of my emotions about the loss of Bob Saget, and rarely do I talk about someone who's passed. I mean, obviously, Sidney Poitier was one of the greatest living, actors of his time. He died, I think he was like 90-something over the weekend, but I didn't know Sidney Poitier, so I'm not talking about him. But, of course, he's been eulogized and talked about all weekend. I hope that you didn't lose anybody over the weekend. I hope that you had a good weekend. I hope that you found joy, ate good meals, hung out with friends or family members, didn't get sick, although it looks like if you haven't, you might. I'm still good as of Sunday night, the 9th of January. And here we are, kicking off this week. And on Saturday night, I am scheduled to be with Christian Finnegan and Ophira Eisenberg in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, Saturday night. I hope to see you there. I know some bunch of listeners are still thinking about coming. So if you're vaccinated and masked, you want to come to that show, we look forward to performing for you together, the three of us, for the first time. Also, want to mention that Peter Coyote is going to join our subscriber event on the 20th of January. He agreed to join us Thursday, January 20th. And I'm very excited to welcome him into a live event. Everybody was raving about our conversation last week. It was tops, I say. Peter Coyote, January 20th. Mark it down in your calendar. If you're a subscriber, you can be at that event and ask a question to the legend. If you are not, you can't, but I'll probably share it with you. Of course I will. But if you're not, sign up now. Standupwithpete.com. Standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Welcome to all new subscribers, by the way, several new subscribers last week. Psyched to have all of you. Let's do the news. Let me give you the most up-to-date, posted at like 2 in the morning, most important or impactful stories according to me, starting with sound and then headlines in what I call the last 24. And then I play the sound effect from 24, the Fox Television Show. Today's news is brought to you by Truebill.com. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. A lot of listeners have taken advantage of this. Truebill.com/stand-up. Let's do it. All right, lots to talk about here at the beginning of the week. I got COVID news for you. I got Russia-Ukraine updates. The men convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery get life in prison, all three of them. A horrible fire in New York City killed at least 19 people, including children, and injured like 60 more. It was just an awful fire. I can't recall one that bad, but at least 19 dead, dozen injured in a New York City Bronx apartment fire. But you are alive and you are listening to Stand Up, and I am very happy to have you joining me. Along this journey, we call life more, listeners belonging to our community, making connections with each other. I just heard from Barry Hummel. He's got Maddie Carlson joining him on his podcast, Pops on Hops. Look forward to seeing you on Thursday night. Lots of news that I want to play for you. Let's start with the COVID news. Well, I can tell you we are fucked, at least for a couple more weeks, folks. Sorry to curse right here at the top if the kids are in the car, but they need to know. Mass vaccination sites in the United States are returning. Some at-risk Americans will be eligible for a fourth shot this week. U.S. flight cancellations continued into the weekend. If you got out to your destination, and I know Dr. Zach's did, and Michael Cohen did as well, so I'm very excited for both my friends that made it, both of them actually, to Cancun. I have two friends in the world that both went to Cancun around the same time. Different resort, but what does that say about my social network? Anyway, I hope your flight doesn't get canceled. Omicron, as it spreads, the CDC is trying to clarify its message on testing and isolation. 1 week in, Mayor Adams is staying the course in New York City on schools. I've got audio for you. That city in 14 million near Beijing, Tianjin, I think, starts testing all residents after Omicron surfaces there. India has banned election rallies for a week as virus cases soar there, and Americans continue to grapple, of course, with the disruptions and the depression, anxiety, and weariness, as my friend Maura Quint calls it, caused by the strength of this latest Omicron variant, and now new concerns about the Fluicron and the Deltacron and all kinds of things to worry about. Let me help calm you down by getting to some of the experts, which we heard from on the Sunday shows. Let's head over to Meet the Press, where on Sunday, Chuck Todd had a couple of experts on, including Zeke Emanuel of University of Pennsylvania. He asked him about mandates and vaccines. Zeke Emanuel weighing in on the Supreme Court arguments. We heard from Eric Siegel, by the way. Weekend Extra. I didn't mention that at the opening. Thank you to everybody who was very happy about that. If you hadn't heard it, go check that out now. But here is Zeke Emanuel and Meet the Press. He's a well-respected physician, by the way.
Zeke, you brought up the issue of mandates and how important it would be. I'm sure you have seen all the reports. At best, maybe the healthcare mandate makes it through the Supreme Court. The workplace one may not. What does that mean if the vaccine mandate is the best tool in the toolbox and you can't use it as aggressively on the federal level? Does that mean testing becomes a bigger priority?
Look, the Supreme Court has to recognize that COVID in the workplace is a real health threat and really does affect many people. And unfortunately, many frontline workers have died from COVID and contracting COVID in the workplace. They need protection, and mandating vaccination is a quite reasonable protection. I've called for 6 or 8 months now for mandates among healthcare workers. These are our best tools to get to 90% vaccinated. Testing lets us know who's infectious, but it doesn't intervene in the virus, whereas vaccines do intervene. They make sure that people who get infected don't get hospitalized at such a high rate and are very, very, very unlikely to die. That's an important protection for people, and we have to make sure that people get it. We will never get to 70, 80% or 90% of the American population vaccinated without a mandate. It's just that simple. And for the Supreme Court to take that away in the midst of an emergency seems to me to be very wrong. I signed on to an amicus brief because I think it's legal and I think it's absolutely vital for the health of the country.
I also like Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. She was on PBS's NewsHour with Judy Woodruff, and, you know, she has a positive spin on what they've accomplished so far. But after you get past that, I think she acknowledges what she refers to as malaise. Watch out, that's a buzzword for political leaders in America.
Your administration, the Biden-Harris agenda in the beginning, a year ago, got off to a strong start, but it's obviously stalled. Right now, the president's approval ratings have taken a dramatic hit. Did you try to do too much?
Well, I think that there are many metrics by which we can measure where we are today. One of them, again, is where we are on COVID, which we just discussed. Let's also look at where we are on the economy. Last year, we created 6 million new jobs. Last year, we brought unemployment down to, I believe it was 4.2%, which the economists most didn't believe would happen until at least 2023, 2024. So we have seen great progress. We passed an infrastructure law. People have been, of both parties as administrations, have been talking about doing for generations. There has been great progress, no doubt. You know, COVID, for example, I mean, everybody is frustrated with that. And I understand and I fully appreciate there is a level of malaise. We're 2 years into this thing. You know, we want to get back to normal. We all do. But we have to then do the tough and hard work of pushing through with solutions, understanding that there are going to be challenges, but let's meet the challenges where they are. And let's also take a moment to see the progress we've achieved.
All right, that's the Vice President Kamala Harris on the PBS NewsHour. Now let's head out to Chicago, where we heard from the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, the city of Chicago, in real tough situation with the schools in Chicago. I heard from listener Kara, who was talking about how difficult this has been for parents and families in Chicago. Here is Lori Lightfoot with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, kind of giving her side of the conflict.
What leverage do you have? How can you force this to happen? Or are you a little bit at the whim of the teachers union?
Well, the leverage I think we have is that we've got the will of the people. Parents are outraged, and they are making their outrage known to the teachers union. This is a very different dynamic than ever before. We've got an enormous amount of parent activism. They are writing letters, emails, they are protesting, they're holding press conferences. This is an unprecedented level of parent activism, all in support of returning to in-person learning. And we know why. We live in a district where 70% or more of our kids qualify for free or reduced lunch.
All right, and she goes on to make the point, but those of you in Chicago know the story, and those of you that are interested, definitely go follow that story. It's a big, big deal out in Chicago. Shout out to Kara and any other families that are struggling through this across the country when it comes to schools. And back to New York City, where Jake Tapper had the new mayor, Eric Adams, on and asked him about how he's going to deal with the largest school district in the country.
California is going to require all students in public schools to get vaccinated to attend school in the fall. Will New York City do the same?
That is something I am speaking with my healthcare professionals to do an evaluation to determine if that is what we do. Let's be clear. In this country, we do vaccinate for smallpox, measles, and other things. And so we need to engage in a real conversation of how to educate, use the time before the fall to educate our parents, to show the importance of it. And we're going to sit down and determine if we're going to roll that out as well.
Well, that will be a closely followed story because that is the most populated school district in the country. Mayor Adams still weighing his options, apparently, with a very political answer there. And while we're talking about him, Jake Tapper also asked the New York City mayor why he had appointed his own brother to a very high-ranking position in law enforcement, and I thought this was good.
The New York Post and the New York Daily News are reporting that you've appointed your brother, a fellow retired police officer, as a deputy commissioner for the NYPD. Is that true? And if so, doesn't that at least violate the spirit of the law in New York, which says public servants, friends, and family members should not benefit from their positions?
Well, we have something here in the city called Conflict of Interest Board. They do rulings and waivers. It's going through that process now. They would make the determination, and we have a great system here in the city. But let me be clear on this. My brother is qualified for the position. Number one, he will be in charge of my security, which is extremely important to me in a time when we see an increase in white supremacy and hate crimes. I have to take my security in a very serious way.
All right, so Mayor Adams thinks he needs his brother to watch his six, apparently, which is, ridiculous. I think nepotism should never be allowed in such situations, but what do I know? Now, let's get back to COVID-related news. Now, I don't have any Michael Osterholm, and I don't have any audio of another epidemiologist. I should probably check in with Megan May this week, who is always great to join us, our favorite epidemiologist. But here is, I'm sorry, smart cousin Darcy. I think Scott Gottlieb on Face the Nation lays out some stuff that I think is interesting here for people to know, and also admits that he was wrong about Delta, which is a pretty big thing to be wrong about, that he thought that would be the last major variant, and he couldn't be more wrong about it. But at least he admits it here, Darcy. No? You still don't like it? Well, I'm playing it anyway. Gottlieb!
You said we'll be past the Omicron wave by February. Do you stand by that trajectory? And do we get to breathe a sigh of relief at that point?
Hopefully we do. I mean, many people, including myself, have predicted that Delta would be the last major wave of infection, and Omicron came along, which represented sort of divergent evolution. I think surprised us that the virus was able to mutate so heavily and evade the immunity that we've acquired. But if you look what's happening across the East Coast right now, New York City, Washington, D.C., Maryland, probably Florida as well have already peaked, maybe Delaware and Rhode Island. You're going to start to see that in the statistics this week. You're going to start to see those curves, those epidemic curves bend down. You're already seeing that in New York City and Washington, D.C. The risk right now is to the Midwest, where you have rising infection, where they aren't in the thick of their Omicron wave yet, and you have states that had high hospitalization rates going into this. They had a lot of Delta infection. They had been coming out of their Delta wave, so their hospital census was already high, and now they're seeing Omicron infections pick up. On the good side, hospitalizations are down relative to cases, but cases are up substantially, so it's pressing hospitals. Many of the hospitals on the East Coast are going to reach or surpass their previous hospitalization totals. New York City is probably the city that's best equipped to handle it. They're about at 55% of the hospitalizations that they saw during that devastating first wave. But in other states, they're more pressed. They're closer to 100% of the hospitalizations they saw in previous waves. Finally, on the good side, length of stay is down substantially. So length of stay has gone from 4 days to 1.6 days in a survey by Kaiser, for example. So that's allowing hospitals to turn over beds. But the sheer velocity of the spread right now and the number of hospitalizations is pressing them.
Gottlieb! All right, well, the great Ali Velshi had on Dr. Alice Stanford, who is the founder of Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. Velshi continues to bring on experts, people of color, to give them a voice and a platform on a major news network, MSNBC, Saturday and Sunday. And I want to play for you what she had to say, because interesting points about testing and why there are barriers and they need to be moved and needs to be more accessible. Everything does.
You've also been struggling with vaccine resistance, built-in vaccine resistance. In part, some of the places in which you work, people do not have general practitioners. They don't have a doctor. Normally, they're not even getting tested for, whether they got heart disease or diabetes. So getting tested for COVID seemed to be even further off than that. Have more people been convinced by your work to get vaccinated?
Absolutely. And right now, the demand is for testing. So when people come in and they are scared to death and they're vulnerable and they're bringing their whole families, not everyone is positive when we do the rapid test. That is a prime time to say, let's get you vaccinated today. Okay, mom is positive, but your children are not, and they're 6. And we have the vaccine right around the corner in our medical offices. Please allow me to do the most I can to protect your family. And so that's working. And even when you're requiring vaccine, a lot of locations and employers, you have to make it barrier free and accessible for folks. It's got to be at hours when they can get there. And that still is not universally happening in our country.
All great and important points, and good on Velshi to have Dr. Alice Stanford on to point to these more vulnerable communities and the struggles that they have with accessibility. All right, well, what else can I tell you in COVID headlines? New Jersey deployed the National Guard to nursing homes as COVID is surging there. Omicron threatening New Year's gym surge. Federal court has denied Oklahoma's attempt to block the Pentagon vaccine mandate. The CDC is backing moving the Moderna booster wait time to 5 months after vaccine. Supreme Court seems skeptical of Biden's vaccine mandates. Rapid nasal COVID tests feared to be returning false negatives. U.S. has agreed to keep soldiers on base amid a COVID surge in Japan. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all the COVID news I have for you. If you or anybody in your family is ill, I'd love to hear from you. Always happy to hear from people, talk to people. And if anybody is severely ill and or there's anything we can do to help folks deal with this, there's a whole bunch of amazing people in our community that are always willing and maybe nearby that might want to connect. So let me know. All right, let me change gears out of COVID news and into the conflict on the border of Russia and Ukraine. Here is CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams on the case, setting it up for us for about 2 minutes. And then I've got commentary from the Secretary of State and a couple of others for you. I think this is, of course, a very important international story. Not much more important than this story that develops right now on the eve of potential war. Back to CBS News, Margaret Brennan, who sets it up and throws to her foreign correspondent, Holly Williams.
Now to the crisis in eastern Ukraine, where Russian forces appear poised for an invasion. Tonight, U.S. and Russian officials will begin talks, with the Biden administration already saying they're open to limits on NATO military exercises or missile placement in the region if it will help diffuse tensions. Our Holly Williams reports from Ukraine.
Good morning. Here in eastern Ukraine, they've been fighting against Russian-backed separatists since 2014, and trenches like these now carve up this part of the country. The conflict has turned farmland and villages into killing fields, and more than 14,000 people have lost their lives, according to the Ukrainian government. Now, this winter, there are fears of a Russian invasion. Tens of thousands of Russian troops, up to 100,000 Russian troops, according to one count, are massed along Ukraine's border, and alarm bells are ringing in Washington. Now, according to some, a ground invasion involving tanks and artillery and armoured vehicles is unlikely until the ground here freezes over. But here in the trenches, they've told us they think that it could happen at any time. The big question is what Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, is thinking and what his true objectives are. He claims that Russia is a victim of Western aggression, and he's demanding security guarantees in return for defusing these tensions, including rolling back NATO troops from Eastern Europe. But here in Ukraine, some people have told us that President Putin is essentially playing a game of chicken, a Cold War-style game of brinkmanship that is ratcheting up tensions, trying to extract concessions from the US and its European allies, and thereby perhaps extending Russian influence here in Eastern Europe. Now, last year, the US government gave Ukraine nearly $500 million in military aid, including anti-tank missiles. And President Biden says that if Russia invades, the US will respond with, quote, severe consequences, economic consequences. But he has ruled out sending in US combat troops.
That's Holly Williams at CBS News. She's on Twitter at Holly M.A. Williams. A good follow if you want to follow reporters in the area, as well as you let me know who you're hearing and seeing from, what reporters you're hearing and seeing from internationally, especially. Always happy to support independent journalism. Now let's get to some of the people that are going to be crafting American foreign policy when it comes to this conflict. Here is veteran and Congressman Ruben Gallego talking about what kind of equipment and training Ukraine forces should have.
Javelins, making sure they have potentially the stingers they need, the training that Ukraine needs, and also continuing the good work they're doing. I've seen so far in terms of unifying our European allies onto one message that there will be consequences if Russia takes 1 inch of Ukraine soil. And that's the thing that we need to understand. Russia at this point may not do a full invasion of Ukraine, but to save face, because Putin is a very small man, he'll try to do like a very incremental invasion to gain what he would say safe space or a buffer. And that should be treated just as bad as the rest of it.
All right, well, Senator Mitch McConnell is not in much disagreement with his Democratic colleagues for once when it comes to the threat that Russia poses. Here is the turtle on the Senate floor.
The West cannot be bullied into betraying our friends, forgetting our principles, or accepting a Russian sphere of influence. Freedom's friends will either stand up to the bully while we have a chance, or we will rue the day we did not, whether in Europe, Asia, or elsewhere. If Putin walks away from this self-created crisis feeling emboldened, he and others will run the same play again and again and again.
Wow, those are some real dramatic pauses from Senator Mitch McConnell to really land that point. Too bad he never changes his tone hardly at all. Well, here is the Secretary of State, one of the most important people when it comes to this, and Russia and U.S. negotiators are apparently meeting as we speak here on Sunday. Here's Secretary Antony Blinken on CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper.
Look, first, Jake, I don't think we're going to see any breakthroughs in the coming week. We're going to be able to put things on the table. The Russians will do the same, both directly with us at NATO, at the OSCE, and we'll see if there are grounds for moving forward. But here's what I can say. First, any progress that we're going to make is going to have to happen on a reciprocal basis, by which I mean if the United States and Europe are taking steps to address some of Russia's concerns, Russia will have to do the same thing. Second, nothing's happening without Europe. And third, it's hard to see making actual progress as opposed to talking in an atmosphere of escalation with a gun to Ukraine's head. So if we're actually going to make progress, we're going to have to see de-escalation, Russia pulling back from the threat that it currently poses to Ukraine.
All right, I'm sure that'll happen. What? Wait, here's more from Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
I can't tell you whether it's likely or not. I can tell you this. We're committed to dialogue and diplomacy to see if we can resolve these challenges peacefully. That is by far the preferable course. It's by far the most responsible course. But equally, we're prepared to deal very resolutely with Russia if it chooses confrontation, if it chooses aggression. We'll see. It is now up to President Putin to decide which path he wants to follow. We're prepared again, starting this week, to talk through all of this, to hear their concerns, for them to hear ours, to see if we can make progress.
All right, well, that is your Ukraine-Russia update. Now let's get to your democracy update. It is dwindling. Here is ABC This Week's George Stephanopoulos with January 6th committee member Jamie Raskin, who I've been talking a lot about on the show lately.
Are you confident you can complete your work before the midterms? And how concerned are you that if the Republicans do take control of the Congress next time around, they'll undo everything you've done in the committee?
Well, look, I think that the true obligation of a political party in a constitutional democracy is to accept that there are rules of the game. And we play by those rules even if we don't like them. I mean, I'm an opponent of the Electoral College. I believe in a national popular vote for president. But as long as we have the Electoral College, we've got to respect the rules under it. But what's evolved on the other side, as President Biden put it this week, is a rule or ruin philosophy, which is the GOP is going to rule, or they're going to ruin the prospects for political democracy to make progress in any other way. And that's a fundamentally authoritarian approach. The GOP under Donald Trump's thumb is now positioning itself outside of the constitutional order. They attack our constitutional processes, and they attack the outcome of our elections, even against all of the evidence. We had 61 federal and state courts reject all of their claims of electoral corruption and fraud, including 8 judges who Donald Trump appointed to the bench himself, and still they're out there propounding lies. That is a totalitarian tactic, and we have to call it for what it is and say that's not going to work in American democracy in the 21st century. We have to defend our democratic institutions against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and against all those authoritarian governments abroad that are trying to destabilize American democratic culture.
All right, let's play one more. This is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, also ringing the alarm bell on the threat that Republicans are posing to America's fundamental democracy.
What the Republicans are doing across the country is really a legislative continuation of what they did on January 6th, which is to undermine our democracy, to undermine the integrity of our elections, to undermine the voting power, which is the essence of a democracy.
History at Yale University.
You know what? I said that was going to be the last clip I'll play, but I got one more. It's from Yale historian and author of On Tyranny, Timothy Snyder. He joined Elie Velshi this weekend, and I wanted to make this the long clip. Sometimes I play a longer clip. This is 3.5 minutes from the smartest show on cable news, in my opinion, Elie Velshi with Yale historian Timothy Snyder.
One of the important matters to bring up is that democracy and tyranny are not binary. There are lots of authoritarian regimes today and in history that have elections in which some people get to vote and some people don't, and some votes get counted and some don't. A lot of Americans think democracy is not in peril because we're still going to keep voting.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. I mean, both historically and in the contemporary world, you can have a kind of degradation where elections cease to become a legitimating principle, slowly become something like a ritual. And it's very hard to know at just exactly what point your country stopped being a democracy. Historically, this has been true. There are contemporary cases where this is true, like, for example, Russia. Russians had a couple free elections, and then from a certain point, they were no longer free. More recently, Hungarians had a series of free elections, but from a certain point, the elections could no longer really be considered to be fair. So I think you got your finger on something very important. If we lose democracy in this country, it's not going to be because we stop having elections. The person who overturns democracy in this country will probably do it on the occasion of some kind of an election, and then try to have ritualistic elections thereafter.
Let's talk about, obviously, because of what you do and the books you've written and the things you teach, people who talk to you or invite you on their shows like I do want to hear your view about tyranny and about authoritarianism and about dictatorship and about the decline of democracy. But I think that lots of Americans don't. Lots of Americans would like to think of January 6th and Donald Trump as things that are in the rearview mirror. And frankly, we'll get bored with the conversation about democracy because what they're worried about is their finances and they're worried about COVID and things like that. How does this conversation sustain in a way that is important to people without turning them off?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I would say, number one, the one way to phrase the point you're making is that this country just doesn't have a very good memory, right? I mean, democracy needs history. And the last few decades, we haven't done a very good job of teaching history. Democracy needs history because history teaches you about your mistakes. It gives you the chance to do the self-correction, which is supposed to be the essence of democracy. If everybody thinks that they're right all the time, you can't really have democracy, and history teaches you that. But I think there's another point here which has to do with the future. Now, much as it's right for you and I to be talking about the scenarios by which this can all unravel, it's also very important to make the point that a working democracy is going to deliver a much better future. It's going to represent us. It's going to deal with the problems that are ahead of us. It's going to make sure that this country continues. It's going to create a better life for our children and grandchildren. There's a very positive story to be told as well, and I think we're probably not telling that one.
All right, what a great back and forth and interview, as always, between Elie Velshi and anybody, but that was Timothy Snyder. I should get both those guys back on the show, but right now I got to get to all of the rest of the headlines from the weekend. It is time for your news dump, another original by the great Pete Coe.
Bob Saget gone too soon, now we're in a slump. He'd like the song about bestiality for today's news dump.
I lived there for a while and banged half the country, which is fucking awesome. That's not funny. That's not funny.
Yes, there he goes, Bob Saget with the bestiality joke. Thank you very much, Pico. You are a class act for doing that. Now let's get to the rest of the headlines, starting with the weather in the Pacific Northwest, where flooding coursed over roads, inundated farmland, and curtailed access to Native American reservations in Washington state on Sunday as the Pacific Northwest slowly recovered from a series of storms that have engulfed the region with the rain and snow. Rainy and wet here in the Northeast on Sunday. Should have gone skiing yesterday. Really regretting that one. I saw this headline. The baby that was handed to a soldier during Afghanistan evacuation has been reunited with its family, according to a new report from Reuters. I think that's a happy story. Wanted to mention to you. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, has refused to take back his recent controversial comments on the unvaccinated in his country of France. Macron acknowledged his use of coarse language while referring to the country's unvaccinated population that apparently may have upset some, but he said he takes full responsibility, according to the Associated Press. He added that France's strategy is to vaccinate, and said citizens must agree to do your civic duty. Macron, of course, made comments last week saying he wanted to, quote, piss off unvaccinated people while calling those who choose not to get the COVID jab as irresponsible. So it's getting very heated rhetoric over in France. Back here in the U.S., Michelle Obama, former First Lady, of course, imagine anybody who doesn't know who she is, that I really needed to say that. She announced that she was going to push to register 1 million new voters ahead of the midterms. In a statement on Sunday, Michelle Obama said her foundation, When We All Vote, along with 30 other organizations, will recruit and train at least 100,000 volunteers to register voters. Among the other groups involved in the effort are the League of Women Voters, the National Bar Association, the NAACP, Rock the Vote, Common Cause, and the Voto Latino Foundation. She announced it in a tweet, and I imagine on all of the rest of her social media platforms, because she is a very powerful woman. Still, of course, the body of a man who abandoned his car in a snowstorm was found in Virginia. Sad news about the body of Jacob Whaley. He was 34, recovered in a very dense pine plantation about 200 yards off of the road, according to the New York Times. The body was discovered by a search group made up of volunteers and officials from the sheriff's office. I guess if you get stuck in a situation like that, the lesson is to probably stay in the car. But what the hell do I know? Guy made his best decision, and unfortunately, sadly, it didn't work out. Australia has agreed to a $3.5 billion deal for tanks with the U.S., according to the Sydney Morning Herald. Australia will commit to buying 75 new M1A2 Abrams tanks, or as the Aussies call them, Abrams tanks, 29 explosives clearing assault breach vehicles, 17 assault bridge vehicles, and 6 additional armored recovery vehicles. The Aussies love the American firepower. Sorry about that, and to all Australians listening. The average U.S. gas price in America dropped. That was redundant. U.S. gas price in America. The average U.S. gas price dropped 2 pennies over 3 weeks to $3.39 a gallon. Get an electric car, I say. And more sad news. The death toll in a random freak rockfall on a Brazilian lake rises to 10. There's a video of it. I didn't watch it. I don't think you should either. Terrible story. And the embattled Hollywood Foreign Press Association proceeded with their film awards last night without a show. No show, no telecast, no nominees, no red carpet, host, press, or even a live stream. Instead, the Golden Globes went on with like a blog. It was like a 90-minute private event, apparently. They announced the names of the film and television winners on the organization's social media feeds, and I guess it doesn't even really matter who won the awards, right? And finally, a happy story for today's news dump. Nearly 24 employees of a minor league baseball team received an unexpected holiday bonus this year. I saw this story and wanted to share it with you. The Iowa Cubs were sold, the AAA affiliate for the Chicago Cubs, and it meant that the owner's final day as the team owner, Michael Gartner, it was last week, and he gathered 23 full-time workers at the park for a final meeting, saying they were just going to get like new business cards. But in fact, he handed them cash in envelopes. and what Yahoo Sports called an unforgettable goodbye gift. Gardner is an 83-year-old Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, former chief of NBC News, who owned the Iowa Cubs for more than 2 decades. And he gave everybody checks equal to $2,000 for each year of service, or about $600,000 in total for the whole group. A generous gift, of course. And I thought that'd be a nice story to end the news dump on. And now it's time to get to my guest. Coming up, my conversation, as I have almost every Monday here for you, with Maura Quint, which you are not going to want to miss. We really got deep, as we often do. Funny. It was great. Loved that talk. And Claire Potter, quickly becoming one of my favorite professors of political science and history to talk to. Another great conversation with her, her second time on the show. But first, I got to tell you about Truebill, because a lot of listeners say that because I told them about them, they saved a bunch of money. Truebill is a new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or you simply forgot about. And on average, people are apparently saving thousands a year with Truebill. My wife used it, and we saved a bunch of money. A couple of listeners told me, and if you have, let me know, and I'll read your testimonial. But you can see all your subscriptions in one place. Keep the ones you want, cancel the ones you don't, right from the app. And you get this concierge on Truebill who's there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions, so you don't have to. No talking to humans, no difficult conversations. My daughter's had a whole bunch of apps signed up. We didn't even know it. And my wife used Truebill and saved us a bunch of money. Truebill has over 2 million users, helped save them over $100 million. Becca says, hands down, the best financial app I've discovered. In my first week, I opened up $187 in unused recurring subscriptions. I'm obsessed and never want to manage my finances without Truebill again. So start canceling those unused subscriptions at Truebill.com/standup. Go right now. Truebill.com/standup could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/standup. You have no idea how many subscriptions you unknowingly pay for a month. You probably don't want to know the answer, so why not skip the part where you use Truebill and identify where you can stop spending and start saving. Truebill.com/standup now. All right, now it's time to get to my guests, and I couldn't be happier to have Professor Claire Potter joining us here again on the program. She was a real hit last time she joined us for the first time. You should follow her on Twitter at Tenured Radical. Subscribe to her Substack newsletter, Political Junkie. And, of course, she is a professor of history at the New School for Social Research in New York City. And her new book is Political Junkies, From Talk Radio to Twitter, How Alternative Media Hooked Us on Politics and Broke Our Democracy. I had a great first conversation with her, and this one, if I dare say, is even better. I learned so much from Professor Claire Potter, and here we go. All right, by popular demand, she joins us again, and it was episode 481 that we got to meet here at the Stand Up with Pete Dominick show. Professor Claire Potter. And I got to say, Claire, welcome back. I got to say, I just re-listened to that interview. I did a very good job with you that first time.
You did a fantastic job, Pete. I was just like overwhelmed by how fabulous you were. And I think our fabulosity sort of meets in the middle.
Right. I think that's true. And I think that's probably going to be the name of our new podcast.
Right. Fabulosity.
Hey, we say it together. It's great. So we were just talking before I hit record about, you're writing stuff right now. You're reading stuff constantly. You have a Substack post about your favorite books of 2021. And it just made me want to ask someone like you, an intellectual, a public intellectual, an academic, a writer, an author, a thinker. Well, how do you read? How does anyone read anymore? Books and even long articles. How do you literally structure your life? Do you turn off your alerts to read and write? What times of day? Like, how do you do it? You read so much, and I just keep getting interrupted. And I read I like to think a lot.
Well, that's a great question, Pete. And thanks for having me back.
Of course.
I had a wonderful time last time. I think one of the things that has always been true of me is I read to relax. And, in our hyper electronic world, it revs us up so much that sometimes actually retreating to a book or a magazine that you can actually hold in your hands, lowers your blood pressure, lowers your pulse a little bit. But I also think that in a profession that I'm in, which is writing and being a college professor, really we maintain our relevance by reading. You can't rely on things you used to know in a world that is changing as fast as ours is, and a world where media is proliferating a mile a minute. So I actually schedule my reading. I get up early in the morning, and that's when I read my newspapers and the newsletters from Politico and Axios and The Hill and everything like that. Before I exercise, then I sit down to my writing. I read at lunchtime. I would be reading now, except I'm talking to you. And then I tried it. It's not a problem. But then I try to really stop working by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and read for 2 or 3 hours before I eat dinner and watch the news.
Wow.
Yeah. So it really requires delinking from machines to the best that you can. I use an iPad to read newspapers and newsletters and stuff like that. But I really try not to stay glued to the computer all the time. I try to move things around. And for those of your listeners, because they are listeners, one of the things that I find very useful is audiobooks.
Yes.
Because you can listen to an audiobook while you're driving, while you're running errands, while you're doing all kinds of things. And frankly, I think audiobooks stick in your brain pretty well. If you don't need to be sitting there taking notes, if really just listening to a good story or a good explanation is where you're at, I really recommend downloading things on your iPhone and just using that time that you're moving around the world to take in more information.
I so appreciate that thoughtful example, and that question goes out to anybody when it comes to reading and writing or focusing, especially. And how you don't get distracted by the alerts, but so much more texture that you added to that, and I'm inspired. Is your book, audiobook, Political Junkies?
Political Junkies is in audio form. It's not yet in paperback, which I, wish they would get on that. It is not yet in audio. And I think if readers were interested in bugging the publisher and asking them, when is this book coming out in audio? I really wanted to listen to it. They might move a little faster to have that audiobook prepared.
Well, tell them I'm available for a small fee because I love this book and it needs to be. I am like that person you described. I think I learn and retain things when I hear them. I also like that there's a lot of magazine articles and you have a great Substack. I'd love to hear all of those things be read to me as well. But speaking of media, I wanted to ask you, in your book, you're a historian and you write about the airwaves, of all the airwaves, history of, public broadcasting and so on. And given you've just written a piece at your Substack about a very relevant Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tweets No More is titled. And so that's about my question is about platforming in media. Yesterday, I was talking to the great Peter Coyote, and he, like others, makes an argument that we have to be able to have some kind of control of the airwaves. And that would be nice. Sometimes people argue, speaking of old arguments, about the fairness doctrine. That'd be great. My argument, Professor Potter, is that there's no way to control these things to some extent. Deplatforming I like on social media, Facebook and Twitter, but what are your thoughts, given your wide breadth of history on broadcasting, how things have changed and how, if at all, you can control it, and if controlling it is even worth it?
Right. Well, I think the fairness doctrine was actually very important. And what's ironic about the fact that we don't have it anymore is that the fairness doctrine was basically responsible for the rise of the modern conservative movement. And to the extent in the 1950s and 1960s that media was by and large quite liberal, there was a need for conservative material. And so a lot of conservative activists, and Paul Weyrich was one of this. Paul Weyrich got his start in radio. And one of the things he used to do is make recordings with conservative politicians in his basement. And then he would drive them around to radio stations in Wisconsin and say, here, I've got something for your fairness doctrine requirements. You can play this. That's also how Christian broadcasting became so popular. They would offer their recordings and tapes to stations all over the country that needed fairness doctrine content, and particularly to college radio stations that really didn't have the capacity to generate that kind of content themselves. It was free stuff that they could just plug in. So conservatives, the modern conservative movement, really got a big boost from the fairness doctrine. But that being said, one of the things that happened is as conservatives gained political power in the way they have, they wanted to push the federal government out of regulating everything. Unfortunately, Democrats collaborated with this in the 1990s and the early aughts. So what you really see with companies like Twitter and Facebook and so on is they are born at a moment in which government regulation and communications has almost totally and completely evaporated. And so what they devise is this sort of strategy, thinking, it could come back. They might try to regulate us. And so they develop these terms of service that are very, very elaborate in order to show them to the government and show them to people and say, we're ready. If something bad happens, it will violate our term of service and we will get rid of those people. But we have actually seen that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene use terms of service like a doormat to wipe their feet on. And we've also seen that Facebook and Twitter don't actually have the capacity to regulate in the ways they say they want to.
Right. And I'm just not sure that they will ever get that capacity. And even if they did get that capacity, there will be other alternative platforms. There's also, right now, so many others that you can go to. And how do they all get on the same page with what they're going to do and ban? What do you think overall in terms of the effect of deplatforming? For example, Trump off basically all platforms after January 6th, wasn't it? Twitter and Facebook particularly very effective for him to constantly get anything he wants out there and really hijack a news cycle. And same thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene to a far lesser extent. So I feel like those kinds of deplatforming are effective, but the concern is it makes them, more powerful than ever before.
Well, it does make them more powerful than ever before. But let's roll it back a little bit to Trump's deplatforming and Greene's deplatforming. I think one of the things that is important about Facebook and Twitter is that they are a mainstream platform, right? So Trump and Greene are still on Gab. They're still on Telegram. They're still on all of these conservative platforms, right? But if you spend time on those platforms, which I actually do.
I know. I was about to say, sound like somebody else is on Gab themselves.
Right. So I get emails from Andrew Torba, who's the CEO of Gab. And the second Marjorie Taylor Greene was deplatformed, he sent out this email saying, I welcome Marjorie Taylor Greene to move all of her activity to Gab. And this is a reason why everybody should be on Gab, is so you can hear what Marjorie Taylor Greene has to say. Now, on the one hand, this is, fine, that there are these alternative channels. On the other hand, it's not what people like Trump and Greene and Matt Gaetz and all these other provocateurs, Madison Cawthorn, it's not what they want, because actually they need access to a general audience, right? And those general audience people often filter through to the Gabs and the Parlors and so on, where you can do all kinds of things, like plan an insurgency that you're not allowed to do on Facebook and Twitter. But actually, they're very limited platforms. They don't have as many people on them. And if you're there, you're already in the club. Right? You can't recruit people to the club unless you're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
Right.
So this is in part has a great deal to do with Trump's invisibility. He's not invisible to the people who are on those platforms already, right? They're hearing from him regularly, but blessedly, the rest of us are not. And I think, one of the things that we saw before January 6th last year was a range of people who were not exactly hardcore MAGA folks got sucked in to the insurrection through the mainstream platforms in ways that they might not have had that activity not been occurring.
That is the best explanation, the most nuanced explanation of why it matters. And it's super important because the access to a general audience in terms of being able to, by the way, sell you any product, lipstick or the Marine Corps. You need that. You need an audience. You're just sitting around and all of a sudden a commercial comes on and says, if you want to be sexier, tougher, whatever. And if you don't have access to them, you can't turn them on to your product, which in this case is that there is a Jewish space laser.
Right, exactly. Starting fires in California. Right. Oh, my God. Controlled by George Soros.
Oh, by the way,
Rothschilds.
Well, the news yesterday, an investigation has concluded, and I'm not positive it's the fire that she was talking about, but I think it was. And guess who started that fire? Guess what the start of the fire was? It's the utility again, PSE&G. Right. That's what started it. Right. But they might be funded by Soros. So I think there are questions that still remain.
You never do know.
Well, I want to ask you about that tactic of I'm just asking questions. I want to play something for you, Claire Potter, as a way to take a look at mainstream media and get your take on it, because I take a lot of issue when people are constantly, whether it's a podcast like mine or a big YouTube platform or a mainstream corporate cable media show, from Tucker Carlson to Rachel Maddow. There's no comparison between those two people and what they're doing, except for the point that they both do this thing where they, on their show, say, I'm just asking questions. And I don't like that. And she did it last night about this Hannity thing. And I want to play that for you and see what you think about what Rachel Maddow is doing here. Again, this is out of context. It's only about 30 seconds. But I think you get the drift. Here it is.
Respond to this request for him to provide information to this committee to sort of flesh out the facts around those previously unknown details about what happened. It is interesting that they are appealing to his patriotism in asking him to give information to the committee. I don't know. I think regardless of party, regardless of cable news outlet of your choice, all Americans would like to know what Mr. Hannity knew on January 5th that made him text to the White House, I am very worried about the next 48 hours. What did he know about what was going to happen in the next 48 hours that made him tell the White House chief of staff he was very worried? We shall see.
The reason I don't like that, Professor Potter, is because anybody that was paying any attention to the right-wing atmosphere, mainstream, much less alternative, was worried. Everybody was worried who was paying attention. Hannity has made these people crazy, and he hears from them all day. That's easily what he could be worried about. Sure, he could have some other information. He was in cahoots with the president. Not an unfair question from Rachel Maddow. Just the way that she posed it, it made me feel like, well, everybody was worried. That's not a weird thing. Am I being, is this a bad example? Are there better examples?
No, I think it's a very good example because we know, first of all, that Rachel Maddow is on the left, and we know she's a very intelligent woman who often does good work by untangling stories that are hard for people to understand and making them legible. However, I would say that kind of cable news style, which you're right, is just ubiquitous, leaves people very open to conspiratorial thinking. I mean, really, that's the essence of a conspiracy theory, is the idea that there are all of these questions that can't be answered. And that if we knew who was behind things, if we could connect all the dots, then we could figure out who was responsible for everything. And I think asking questions that you don't know the answer to, lawyers are always saying you never go into court and ask a witness a question that you don't already know the answer to. Well, that has certain consequences in the law, but I think it has consequences in the media as well, because if in fact the media seeks to be authoritative, and it does, and you leave your listeners with a range of open questions that nevertheless imply guilt and conspiracy, you then allow your listeners to begin to spin fantasies rather than tethering them to reality, which is what the news should do.
Such another great answer. Man, do I love talking to you. And I want to take a few more minutes of your time. I know that you have to get back to something far more important, I'm sure, which is anything than talking to me. But I love learning from you. And I think that's such an important answer because we can talk about the conspiracies around an assassination or a corruption investigation. But right now, the conspiracy theories abound around, say, vaccines. And you hear Tucker Carlson, I mean, obviously Maddow and most responsible public, intellectuals at all, people with platforms aren't asking questions like this. But Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, huge platforms constantly asking questions about the vaccines, about the tests, about everything, just asking questions. That's really life or death and really dangerous, which is why I don't like it. So that was my example. It's probably even better than the ones I gave.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually an excellent example. And let me just say, I don't think there's anything more important than having two intelligent people like you and me talking to an audience about these key questions. And I think in relation to the virus and the vaccine, one of the things that's very difficult for media is they want to tell a story that has a beginning and an end and is definitive. And the problem with this pandemic is that it's changing all the time. And so that actually leaves the authorities vulnerable to people on the right saying, well, wait a second, you said that all the rapid tests work. And now it turns out that some of them don't work very well with Omicron, which is true, right? And it's like, well, both things are actually true. But that, when you're in the business of public information, it's important both to acknowledge what is not known, but it's important to acknowledge what people can actually tether themselves to. And I think the pandemic has made this genuinely difficult for all kinds of news sources, not to mention the government, because in fact, what they're doing is measuring what is true scientifically and then trying to integrate it with all of the evidence we have about the social effects of the pandemic. So is it worse to send your children to school and risk that they will get COVID? Or is it worse to keep your children home and risk that they will sink into a permanent depression and not advance with their grade, that they won't have any friends anymore? And, that's the kind of struggle that parents are having, regardless of whether they're conservative or liberal. And so I think in that situation, the media has a particular responsibility to actually pose this as a dilemma. What are the consequences of one choice versus another? I'm not persuaded, actually, that a whole generation of children has been academically destroyed by homeschooling. But I am persuaded that a range of middle class and upper class people have been exposed to how unbelievably fragile our educational infrastructure is. That's the story of COVID. The story is not, should I send my kid to school tomorrow? Will the unionized teachers show up tomorrow? That's a story. But the real story people need to be thinking about was, why was our educational system so vulnerable? And why are we having so much trouble rebuilding it? Why won't the teachers come back? Those are really critical questions to our democracy. The rest of it is totally legitimate anxiety.
I just want to keep complimenting your answers, but that's not interesting. So, but to give your point some color on the public health issue or the challenge of communicating about vaccines, about masks, about how things change. I love this epidemiologist, Dr. Caitlin Jetelina, and she wrote yesterday, one of public health's biggest challenges that when it works, it's largely invisible. This isn't the case in other fields. For example, in medicine, you can see the impact of surgery. In the drug industry, you can see the immediate effect of a prescription. In public health, we don't see what we prevented. For example, how much do you really appreciate seatbelts on a daily basis? I thought that was great. And seeing what public health prevents is nearly impossible for the untrained eye. And that is why it's challenging for public health experts to communicate this, the triumphs of the miracle of the vaccine that is saving lives, even though we're still getting sick.
So I had COVID last week.
Quit bragging.
And I have had both shots and I've had the booster. And one of the things I was impressed by as I was, fighting fatigue and body aches and so on, was how mild the symptoms were, that I could feel them, But over time, I became increasingly confident that I wasn't going to get really sick. And I realized that was the thing I had always feared, was that I would get really, really sick, right? And so that gave me, a sort of big boost of confidence in the system that had delivered those vaccines to me.
Yeah.
I think it's important to recognize that very few people really have good health care. And, I am the daughter of a doctor, the granddaughter of a doctor. I basically have faith in the medical system and in my own decisions on how to navigate it. I've always had good health insurance, but I am really in a minority in the United States. And I think a lot of the people who are really struggling with what they are getting from their public health systems have very little knowledge to process it with, and very little self-confidence to process it with. When a public health official says, as they are in signs all over New York, consult your doctor about the vaccine, a lot of Americans don't have a doctor. And they don't have a doctor either because they don't have health insurance or because they have crap health insurance. If you've ever looked at what's actually available in the ACA system, it is health insurance, but the deductibles are very high. It doesn't pay for much. And furthermore, we have very few primary care physicians, right? So that there are a lot of perfectly middle-class people with health insurance who don't have a primary care physician to consult. So again, I think we can sort of look at these things as COVID specific, but they actually reveal much greater weaknesses in our social and economic systems.
Yeah, you make such a good point about the healthcare issue. The Affordable Care Act, healthcare reform is supposed to help create more access, affordability, and quality. And I guess it certainly helped create more access. But you point to the fact that there's a shortage of doctors. Well, if we are all on the same road, we're waiting in a line, much less quality and affordability we can discuss any other time. I know that's something that you write and think a lot about. Before I let you go, I want to ask you, because I guess now I just want to know your thoughts a year later on kind of what happened and where we go from here. And the issue of accountability, I think, is one that people are discussing a lot, and whether or not the Department of Justice is going to be able to get more than just the rank and file who were there that day climbing the walls and shitting in the Capitol and take down some more organizers. What are your thoughts a year later and what we witnessed and where we're going?
Yeah. Pete, it was so hard to process at the time.
Yeah.
I remember watching it on television and being completely stunned, and at various points starting to cry, because I couldn't grasp how this terrible thing had happened, even though we were all worried that something was going to happen. And certainly I had been on Gab, I'd been on Parler. I knew something was going to happen, but I had no idea it would take that form. I think we've learned a lot in the past year. I think we have to thank a lot of investigative reporters who have done the work of going out and actually talking to these people. There was a great piece in New York Magazine by, I'm trying to think who wrote it, Carrie something or other. Anyway, it was the story of 3 of the people who had gone there and whose lives had been destroyed by it. And I think, part of what we're starting to see from the evidence that's emerging from trials and from stories like that is that there were a fair number of people involved with that who had some degree of mental illness.
Carrie Howley, Gina Roseanne Guy, what do you do the day after you storm the Capitol? I'll definitely read this. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. No, it's just a terrific piece. And so I think there were people with some degree of mental illness. I think there were people, people now talk about some of these groups as they have formed online and in person as almost cultish. That people lost their capacity to actually think independently and continue to think that they were thinking independently. I mean, that's the ironic piece of it is that they kept presenting themselves as the only people in the United States who were thinking independently when in fact they had lost their capacity for independent thought. So that there's a tremendous amount to be learned from J6 about the role social media plays in creating that kind of mindset and also activating people who have other emotional and economic problems that actually need to be addressed, right? So there's that. I think the other thing is, I think what many of us in the mainstream hope for is a definitive report that lays out very clearly what happened, who was responsible, why did it happen. I would also say if we believe that that definitive report is going to change minds on the right, that is a sad delusion.
Well, yeah, that's why an independent commission would have been a bit more legitimate. But but I think that's a great point. But you write about post-truth in your book.
Right. Well, and of course, we've seen what has happened to Republicans who did, in fact, join the commission that the Democrats organized.
Exactly.
Liz Cheney is being attacked and primaried and vilified. Adam Kinzinger is leaving Congress. Yep. And so, really, the Republican Party has a lot to answer for in not actually supporting a true investigation of this. But that said, these reports have never persuaded everybody. If we look at the Warren Commission,
right.
Sure. I mean, people are still spreading conspiracies.
9/11 Commission, Tower Commission, all of the commissions,
right,
but those
exactly.
were a different time.
So a report can actually become the starting point for all kinds of new conspiracies as well. Let me just add one thing, which is I am not a big proponent of putting a lot of these people in jail. I don't think imprisoning people is useful. I think unless they actually committed violent crimes, which many of them did, they should be let off with some kind of civil punishment. But I think imprisoning people who were genuinely led astray by people who should have known better and did know better and used them as cynical, a cynical attack
I have a
on our
lot of
democracy.
sympathy. I have a lot of sympathy for people who believed the president of the United States, who said the election was stolen over and over and over and over again, had an army of others in media and government repeating that, and all the way down to their friends and neighbors. I have sympathy for that, too. And I, too, think prison incarceration is dumb. Just one quick follow up on what you said, and I know I interrupted you, but just are you familiar with the University of Chicago study? Robert Pape's study led this study on the 735 people so far that have been arrested and kind of the findings of the demographics socially and economically, et cetera.
I'm somewhat familiar with it. And part of what's interesting is, and that I think this report really should reveal, is there's this whole infrastructure of professionals and actually quite wealthy people who undergirded that attack. Apparently Dallas was one of the biggest areas in which people were flying private planes. To participate. Yep. So I think, we have to look at the business community and the professional community. I mean, I have a friend who I went to college with. I went to Yale. He later went on and got a master's degree in geology, and he's an oil and gas guy. And, he doesn't actually believe that the COVID-19 crisis is real. And he genuinely does not believe that. And he's a scientist. So there is something going on in some of these business communities that is worth taking even a closer look at once the commission is done with its work.
Oh, that's an interesting thing that I have not thought as much about. And I'm not that familiar with the research. I've just heard interviews with Pape and Barton Gellman's piece, I think, in The Atlantic referenced it a lot. So it's just thinking about it's fascinating, the socioeconomics of those who showed up and what they're...
I think that's right. And it's a whole other level of influencers, right? So
they're
if you've
older.
got the politicians who are the key influencers, but then you drop below the people that you're not actually seeing on the national news who are, like I have another friend who posted on Twitter over Christmas that when the hospitals were bulging with COVID patients, and perfectly intelligent person said, well, I have a relative who's a hospital administrator who says all these people really have the flu. And, and I wrote him privately and said, that's just not true. And he said, well, this is a hospital administrator. And what that should actually clue us into is, there are whole networks of people who have influencers in them.
Yeah.
People views that they do respect and that they do care about, and they see them as educated, intelligent people. If these people are not telling the truth, that's a problem.
Well, it only brings up one final question, which is, at what point does Claire Potter end a friendship?
I try to maintain my friendships with people who I think are going down the wrong path, because I don't think there's much to be gained from isolating people further. I like to imagine that there will be some point at which they will realize that they are living in a fantasy. And I've never been one who enjoyed ending friendships over politics anyway. It's part of the reason that I don't spend any time on Facebook anymore, except to just promote my work or this podcast or something like that, because I was ending up in arguments with people I really, really cared about, in which the differences sort of magnified because of the platform itself. And there were people, whom the friendship became pretty tenuous. And I would particularly point to a lot of the conflicts about Hillary Clinton's presidential candidacy.
Oh, really?
Back in 2016. I was a Sanders person. And, there were feminists who stopped speaking to me because of that. And so I really bear that in mind with friends whose views I find unsupportable, that there were people who broke with me over just supporting Bernie Sanders because I thought he was the better candidate. Turns out I might have been right. But I don't want to do that to other people. I want to keep the hand of friendship out and hope that it will be grasped sometime in the future.
Wow, that is very mature. I wish we could all be more like you. I strive to be. But it makes me think that, given that thoughtful answer, there must be something that you're just not thoughtful about. I'd like to interview your partner, maybe some students or colleagues. Are you something that you're just like, Claire is really, she was very short with me today on this. She has no sensitivity for, I don't know. I can't come up with a name.
Actually, Pete, I would say that being a teacher is helpful in being tolerant of opposing views, because students come into the classroom with all kinds of wacky ideas, including things like, the worst book ever written, as far as I'm concerned, is James Lowen's Lies My Teacher Told Me. Because there are all kinds of kids who read that book in high school and then they come to school saying, well, actually just teachers lie all the time. And it's like, no, actually, we don't lie all the time. But they're students, right? You can't actually say to them, I'm not going to teach you because I think you're a lunatic. Your job is to teach them. And so I think it's good practice in terms of meeting people in the middle, listening to what people have to say, and figuring out how to respond to them in ways that are useful.
Is there... Let me just see if I can get a quick answer on that. Where are you on paddling, dear students?
I do not paddle students. I hear that it's terrible for alumni giving. I don't know. But I let them get paddled in their fraternities and sororities where I actually think, local paddling is best.
That's fine. That's fine. That is a great answer. Claire Potter, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me again. I know everybody's going to love our talk.
Oh, Pete, I love you. I'll come back anytime.
All right. Professor Claire Potter, isn't she great? She's a professor of history and co-executive editor of the Public Seminar at the New School for Social Research in New York City. She hosts the podcast Exiles on 12th Street, and she writes the Political Junkie Substack newsletter about politics, culture, media, and higher education. Follow her on Twitter at Tenured Radical. Claire Potter, quickly becoming one of my favorite new smart people to talk about politics, history, media, and where we're at today. All right, definitely give her a follow on Twitter and let her know you heard her here, and I hope to have her back on the show and maybe join us at one of our hangouts. And now it's time for one of our all-time favorites. She joins me almost every Monday. We catch up and we share our conversation, our insights, our observations, our thoughts, our jokes about the week that passed, the week that's coming, and the life that is right now. She is brilliant. She is hilarious. She is a writer. She's an essayist, a humorist, some might say. She's also an activist. She is the campaign chair at a great organization called Americans for Tax Fairness, americansfortaxfairness.org. And she's amazing on Twitter, where she's always active and thoughtful. At Behind Your Back is her Twitter handle. Maura Quint. Let's start with the opening jingle that was written for her. This is by the great Pete Coe.
When regressive taxation has gone too far and your Bloody Mary's just not up to par, it's Maura Mondays.
Yeah, it's already that time of week. It means we get to catch up with the brilliant and hilarious Maura Quint. Hi, how are you? How was your insurrection week?
My insurrection week was just fantastic. I mean, I didn't storm anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe we're supposed to. Were we supposed to do that? Like every holiday has its traditions. Perhaps we need to start one with that one. I'm not sure.
Maybe just climb a wall somewhere and hang a flag that it feels like you identify with.
Grab a podium as you're passing it, just like that's mine now, and walk out. That could work.
That guy. Did you relive any of it? Did you go down any media? Did you look at it or did you look away from it? I kind of turned away from it.
Yeah, I avoided it mostly. It's like there are a couple of things that happen in our political world that you just feel like you have no control over. Like, I can't prosecute any of these people. Yeah. I can't bring anyone to justice. I can't hold anyone accountable. And so it just feels so like overwhelming and kind of pointless, and it's too frustrating to me to even like look directly at. So I totally avoided it, really.
Do you ever watch those Jordan Klepper or anybody else talking to the folks who were there or who still don't believe that Joe Biden won the election, which like the vast majority of people who identify as Republicans don't believe, apparently? Do you ever watch those shows, or do you see those people in real life? And how do you feel? Do you ever feel any sympathy for them for believing that stuff?
Oh my God, no, not a drop, not an ounce of sympathy. No, I don't. There are so many individuals that I encounter on a daily basis that pull at my sympathies in many ways, and I'm a very naturally sympathetic person. I'm not going to waste any time or any sympathy on people who have just made a choice to be very deliberately blind to reality in that way. I perhaps a bigger hearted person would be able to. I don't know.
Were you ever, like, on the day, I was sympathetic towards the idea that the president of the United States and many in the media were saying that the election was stolen. It wasn't just, some crank. It was the actual president who has access to such information. And I did feel bad for people who were gullible enough to buy that lie.
Okay. So, I hate to be really stereotypical here and like go full, just everything is to the Nazis. But this is where I wind up, is just sort of like the good German place. Like, a lot of the Nazis were not terrible people. They were being led astray by this continuum of voices, of powerful voices. But, at the end of the day, I got to hold people accountable as well. So, I mean, the individuals who are leading these things, are they more culpable? Sure. Am I the person who gets to like ultimately determine culpability? Unfortunately not. I would love to have that power. I mean, like, if anyone has that sort of godlike power to be able to say, all right, you bear this percentage of responsibility and you bear this percentage of responsibility. But unfortunately, no one has asked me for my Excel sheet on that. So for now, I just say, no, they're all responsible for their actions.
I really like that answer. It's caused me to rethink. I think the historical reference there is an important one, and then just apportioning kind of blame and responsibility and having some kind of, as you say, spreadsheet. Do you have a spreadsheet for sympathy and culpability in your computer for like personal actual
I'm
people?
Sorry. Do you not like to keep your life organized, Pete? Is that what that's fine. Whatever. Some people don't need to have these things in writing. Others of us, we like to quantify our levels of anger and hatred. And it just keeps it, smoother. You can check on that.
Okay.
Oh, right.
So along those lines, the lines of sympathy, morality, or where are we now with people who are still not getting vaccinated for against COVID-19 at this point when we are breaking records all over the country on the way up? And a lot of people are saying, well, this variant isn't as bad, but lots of people are dying every day and getting very ill. What are your thoughts about the folks out there that are still not getting vaccinated? Is that a similar kind of sympathy or lack of?
I mean, there are. I first want to differentiate, because there are certainly people who do not get vaccinated because they cannot get vaccinated because they have certain levels of health issues. And I always want to specify that there are individuals who can't get vaccinated, and that's why the rest of us need to get vaccinated, to protect those people. So those people aside, the ones who absolutely can get vaccinated and are making the choice not to, my frustration and anger with them is just it's maxed out. It's overflowing. There's nowhere else for it to go. I mean, of course they're not. Why would they? They don't give a shit about anyone. Whatever, it's frustrating, but I don't have the space to get any angrier, because we've been through it so many times. Now it's just weariness, really. It's just entirely been replaced by weariness. How about you? Are you bursting with anger at them still?
My feelings towards those folks, I guess I don't spend a lot of time on it. I'm still trying to convince them, I think, to get vaccinated. If I'm spending any time on it, there are a few people that I've engaged with that I'm just exchanging information with, and one guy did get vaccinated, but at the same time, I'm a little torn. If the dude doesn't want to get vaccinated, why am I spending so much time campaigning? And I really see, I want to just ask you to unpack weariness. I think it's a perfect word to describe where we are this far into the pandemic, at the beginning of a new year, along with all of the other things in the world, in the news, and the normal everyday things that would be happening in our lives with or without all of these larger things. How do you unpack weariness? What does that look like for you?
I think it just sort of, for me, it's what I can spend time on and how much time I can spend on anything that is going to just frustrate and anger me. And kind of, I don't even want to say acceptance, but kind of a resignation, I guess, that there's not a lot that can be done here, or at least not that I have any ability to do. And maybe that's, I always get a little bit nervous there that I'm kind of passing off responsibility, or that, I'm giving up in some way and not doing as much as I should. And maybe there's a little bit of that too. But a lot of it is just the sense of we've been through this, the needle hasn't moved. And if I put more effort into it, it's going to deplete me. And I can't be depleted. There's too much else I need to do. So it's that sort of a sense of just keep going. It's kind of like looking at your kid's bedroom. It's just a mess. It's you've asked them to clean it a million times. They're not cleaning the room. At this point, what are you going to do? You're going to step in and somehow forcibly do it? That's just going to make you angry. Are you going to yell at them again? They're still not going to do it. Are there consequences that can have any real, that you can actually do? I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, but that's the first thing that came to mind.
I just can't believe that is the analogy that you picked, because I spent 3 hours today conducting an intervention in younger daughter's bedroom. And even when, as far as labeling drawers, because I have had enough, to the point where there are going to be, we've instituted consequences, and it was because I couldn't look at it. She couldn't find anything. She was late for things. It was just so bad. We got all of her friends into a room. We sat her down.
Really? Because that would be great.
No, I just tore her room apart when she wasn't home. And then when she came home, I go, this is where everything goes now. Bye. But I actually did that, and we'll see how it works. I told her I'd now give her an allowance if she could keep it straight.
Bribery. See, that's one that has continued to work. Pay people to get the vaccine. Pay people to keep their rooms
right.
straight.
Well,
like the money incentive does tend to have a bit more of an actual impact.
Carrots and sticks and mandates. And this week we heard arguments at the Supreme Court about mandates. So we'll see what happens with that. I do appreciate, though, everything that you just said and the thoughtfulness and nuance with which you described your weariness. And it's one of the reasons I always love talking to you. You're so good at, I think, putting thoughts into words and people can hear it and say, yes, that's how I feel, or that's close to how I feel. And I think that's in many ways a great way to start off the week. So I always appreciate that. So I just think it's a really important thing also here on January 10th at this point in the pandemic to talk about the emotional and physiological impact that this is having on people, because it lands on people differently. And I guess I just want to be like, however it's landing on you, that you have permission to do whatever you got to do to get through it.
Everyone says that, and I think that's absolutely right. We all need to
you're going to shit on that. You're going to shit on you have permission. Let's do it. Do we have a sound effect? You have permission.
I was not going to shit on it. I was just going to say, and yet when I buy a pound of cocaine and straight guzzle whiskey during all of my Zoom calls, everyone's just like, you probably shouldn't be doing that. And I'm just like, you know what? This has been going on forever. I've been told I have permission to deal with it how I need to deal with it. This is how I'm dealing with it.
I generally, the permission I need is to just do like more upper and lower body strength training and like also like less smoothies because I've just been eating so well. Like that's the permission. That's how I cope.
You and was it Gwyneth Paltrow who ate bread? The two of you are just you being crazy by just veering outside of your.
I like the idea that to cope with the weariness, the depression, the anxiety, you turn to like super healthy choices for all in every sphere of your life.
Well, to be fair, I've never tried that before. Maybe that would work, That is yet to be the path I go for some reason. I don't know what that is.
I am feeling good about being outside and like doing cardio. That's been good. I've been sticking to that during this.
What kind of cardio are you doing? Are you just like running from police dogs or what's up? No?
I run around the lake now that my ankle is better. I was doing long walks and now I'm doing just my 3 mile runs. And it really does it for me, especially like I'm reconnecting to kind of what I did when the pandemic first broke out, that you just like, you got to get out of your house and get your heart pumping. And it's been, that has been good.
Let me tell you, there is nothing that pisses me off more than the fact that exercise does actually tend to make me feel better. That is that is the most angering thing because I'm not going to do it. So it's just doubling down on like, I should, it's good for me. And then when I actually do get around to it, I'm like, oh, God damn it. I feel better. This sucks. I hate this. It's the worst because then like, oh, what? I'm going to do it again? Of course I'm not. Ridiculous.
Somebody needs to watch some more Navy SEAL motivation videos. I've never watched.
Is that what you're doing? A Navy SEAL motivation?
No, I've never watched or listened to any of those, but I know they're huge. Like they're massively popular podcasts and YouTube videos. Those guys talking about getting up at 4 a.m. and going and pounding and all that. Like it really. It's a very
I get it, man. I get up at 4 a.m. I mean, I'm like, just like meet the dawn and I pound that Twitter, man. I scroll hard. For like hours, You can't get me off that shit. I go all in. I do not quit. I understand.
You fully commit to that routine as you did this bit. And I applaud you with everybody is. There's an arena of people that appreciate what we're doing right now.
An arena of people who are like applauding as I, have to face the bear and fight it. And
how are you fighting it? How is the
thumbs downs me?
How is the bear? Talk to me about the bear and what your relationship with the bear has been the last couple weeks here at the beginning, because a lot of people, I'm sure it'll resonate.
I struggled through the end of the year. I really struggled through the end of the year. I did not enjoy my ending of the year. I did not enjoy the moment where I had to be reflective at all and say, what did I think of this past year? And I'm struggling to get this one going. Not like it's like the car from the Flintstones where I got to like get my feet running a certain amount before it starts to like move. But like it does sort of feel that way. And I'm kind of stuck in this like, do we have to keep doing this? Like, do we have to? Like, I still got to show up to work. I still got to like pay attention to the Senate. Like, come on, really? Can't we just be done with all of this?
Yeah,
like,
I would like to move on from a lot of the things that we've been having to deal with in the news, certainly in politics, and to try to get some fundamental things done out of the way that we've been fighting seemingly for way too long. I remember feeling this way about healthcare, and then when it finally got done, it being a relief, or about any campaign, I suppose, that you're a part of, which you've been a part of for most of the last several years of your life in several campaigns. But it is kind of a wheel that you got to get up and keep grinding, or not. I guess you can get off and live a screenplay.
I've heard people do. Yeah, no, I've definitely heard that people get off. I don't know what that's like. Although people getting off is something that they should probably do in private anyway. But
they get off and then they go get off. I watched The Town over the weekend for the first time. Ben Affleck is a bank robber, and then he tries to leave that life and just get out of town and go live on the beach. And Shawshank Redemption too. I just watched that, so you could always do that.
I would love to tunnel through shit for many hours if that meant that I could live on a beach for the rest of my days. I would do that in a heartbeat. Without question.
Is there a distance in your mind that you would travel through a tunnel of shit to get to? Have you worked this out?
I have not Google Maps to this one, but I'm telling you, I could go for a while here. Like if with the reward, I mean, isn't that kind of what life is? Like that's what I think Christianity is really, right? Because you have this like promise of heaven, but you got to tunnel through the shit of life to get there. I feel like that's what they teach you. I don't know. But that's what I heard.
Was not what I was expecting, but I think that's something that I'd love to get listeners' reaction to. I also wanted to ask you a political question. I think this is an important tweet. Your thought, you wrote, "Please stop calling GOP politicians spineless, as though they want to do the right thing but lack courage. They are doing exactly what they want to do." What is it that they want to do?
They want to pass laws that enrich themselves and their friends, and they want to assume power, and that's about it. They don't really I'm talking about elected Republicans, but they don't have a lot else going for them. I mean, there's some that still believe in kind of these old economic theories and sort of small government and stuff, but a lot of them don't even hold that dear. It just makes me crazy because I end up seeing time and time again, like these sort of jokes or these comments about how the Republicans are weak or spineless, or, anytime they don't do something, like they don't vote for legislation that's going to help people or whatever, it's just like, oh, if only they could find a backbone. It's just like, why are we acting like they're Weasley little like coward guys? They have doing everything they want to do. They're not like afraid to vote for you to have health care. Like that's not what's happening, but it gets framed like that a lot, and it makes me crazy, just crazy.
Yeah, I think that's really very well said. And I mean, it's there's still kind of, sometimes I struggle with knowing which man or politician beat another politician. Like Madison Cawthorn.
Oh, yeah.
Madison Cawthorn beat a guy who I know well. I know his character. Like I interviewed him several times. I donated to his campaign. I never do that. He's a guy with a lot of integrity, retired military colonel, super smart, and stood up against the Obama administration at Gitmo. Like very smart guy. And he lost to this joker. And it's like, there's no comparison between these two types of people in terms of their personality, their lack of any kind of integrity at all.
Yeah.
Madison Cawthorn. Come on.
Madison Cawthorn's just such what a despicable, disgusting human being he is. Every time I think of him, the only thing I think of is like the letter that this massive amount of women put together that he went to school with that are like, do not elect this guy. He's basically a rapist. Like he's just an absolutely evil person. And he still got elected into office.
Did you hear his... He and his wife divorced after like 8 months. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did. I did hear that.
I don't want
that sounds right.
I don't want to gossip about a guy's marriage. Gross.
Well, hey, can I like completely go off the political? I have a question for you. Completely.
Yeah.
We're not going to go politics at all.
Please.
This is a very, very random question, but you're a dude, and I am curious because I thought about posting a selfie recently, and I didn't do it because when I post selfies, I have to be very, very careful how I crop them, or else I get a ton of comments, like just on the existence of the fact that I have breasts. Like there are just comments, and some of them are nice.
Just
like,
to
I don't
be
mind
clear,
being...
I'm sorry, just to be clear, you were going to post like a picture of yourself on social media.
Yeah, just a normal picture, like a picture of me at my parents' house. I'm not talking about something like, you know, this is not like an OnlyFans sort of thing. It was just
no,
like
but you should plug your OnlyFans though.
Oh gosh, you know, I would love to, but I like to keep that top tier.
Fair enough.
You know,
Sorry.
only a few people. But yeah, no, I think I have to worry every time when I post a picture or what the picture looks like. And I realized that, like, no matter what, I'm going to get comments about the fact that there are breasts attached to my body. And it's weird. But it occurred to me that, like, I wonder if men ever just kind of wish that they could just, and I don't mean this in the flasher way, but could just post a picture of their dick and just have people comment on it in a very, like, normal way. Just to, like, just this part of your body that you have to hide all the time. I guess that's really all I was going. I'm sorry, this is very confusing, I know, but it's more just the fact that, like, even wearing clothes, people are aware that I have breasts. Yeah. And a penis in your pants, like, most people they're never aware of it. And it's a weird thing to me that it's, like, fully hidden away. And I would imagine that there are times when guys just want to be like, I wish people could see this. But, like, not in a creepy way, just in a sort of, I don't know. Pay attention, comment.
I think that most of the conversation amongst the guys that I know and talk about with is we wish that we could take our balls alone out more.
Huh.
Like, just
interesting.
Drop them out of the fly.
Just like for some air, basically? Or,
the idea there is it's called ball walking, where you pull your ball bag out of the fly of your pants and then you just walk around as if everything's normal. And then at some point someone notices that your testicles are out. And it just... To me, it's the funniest thing in the goddamn world, but to a lot of people, it's considered threatening.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what gets in the way, right? Like the concept of it as being threatening, and then misuse, right? Like terrible people have misused these things and made them threatening, so it doesn't work anymore. But in a world where that was not a threatening thing, that would be pretty funny.
The truth is, I'm trying, I'm making a joke because I'm trying to imagine, like, think of a more thoughtful thing to say about answer your question now.
About my randomness?
Well, you asked two separate questions or two interesting things. One thing I'm interested in is when you do post a picture, that you have to overthink that. Because certainly I don't ever think about that. I want to maybe look good in the pictures I post, but I also don't mind if I look bad or look real, because that's kind of fits in with whoever I am. As a, I don't try to take myself too seriously. Like I'm
can't take a bad picture. That's all.
You
just always look good.
Yeah, with this face, it really doesn't even matter the angle, because they're all sharp angles and chiseled face, Avenger-like face, I think. And Jeremy Renner, as a matter of fact, makes me think I'm good looking. Anyway, I digress. So here's my point, which is I never have to think about that. And then I was thinking it's sad that you do have to think about that. Then I was thinking what kind of a person makes those kind of comments. Then I want to see those comments. But then the answer to your question about do guys, I have no idea. I don't want to speak for the guys, but I'm horrified about the idea of a woman seeing my genitals.
I guess
outside of sexually, and only sexually, like, I have to always worry. Like, I live with my daughters and their friends. Like, my daughter had a friend over, and I just, like, made sure the door was closed because I was just came out of the shower, and I was like, it would be horrible if anybody saw me naked. And I don't think anybody wants to, really. I don't think outside of an obvious intimate moment.
I guess that's what sort of started it for me, was just the recognition of the fact that, like, I don't have any desire to post topless pics of myself. But if I wanted to, there would be an audience. No matter what I looked like or, what my toplessness looked like, there would just be an audience, which is so weird. And I guess it was the thought of like, guys don't really have that. There's
Right.
not like just a known, like there would be an audience of people who want to see this no matter
I think
what.
gay men, I think I could get it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That
for
makes sense.
sure. I mean, like when I think about this, I don't think about it too much, but the idea of like, you know, how desirable I would be in such a situation, I generally don't think I would be desirable. My joke has always been women don't really desire me until they get to know me for like 3 solid months. And then see me in person and realize, yes, I could take him. But like, I think like gay men have always, you know, made comments and made me feel desired. And so I think in that way, but I guess,
That's so funny. Like, because I feel exactly the same. I actually have had this conversation where I'm like, I think the people who find me attractive are people who are like, but she's so funny. And she's smart and funny. And once you sit with that for a while, then it's like, oh, no, yeah, she's pretty. Like, I feel like I only become desirable after someone knows me. I don't feel
that's
like the
interesting
sort of person who
because
walks into a bar and like gets attention.
Well, that I think that's probably untrue, but I think that we have an actual experiment of that with you in that the vast majority of people who love hearing from you every week probably don't even know what you look like. I'm sure many of them have looked you up, but they have all fallen for you because they've gotten to know your thoughts on things, your humor, and just like so many people are like, I love that Maura. My dad, big fan. Asks, is she going to be on? I'm like, calm down.
All right, well, slip me his number. You know, like things are getting a little desperate here. It's all right. But the thing I was going to say is that I don't even, it doesn't work with that way with lesbians. I've never had a lesbian hit on me.
Really?
In fact, I don't think I've ever had a lesbian hit on me. Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, like I've been friends with lesbians, but I've never, to my knowledge, been hit on by a lesbian or had anything said to me by a lesbian ever. So,
well, I wonder about that. I wonder about that photo exchange with gay women, how they feel about such things, given similar body parts. I don't know, like showing boobs or boob pictures.
You don't often hear like you hear a lot about gay men being sort of patrons of porn, and I don't hear a lot about gay women being patrons of porn, but I don't have any idea. That means nothing. It just means that I don't hear about it. It means that
like, we should bring on a lesbian next week and fire questions at her and a gay guy, and we should just have this.
You have to represent the entirety of their culture in the same way that I have to represent the entirety of straight women.
Yes,
which I'm willing to do.
Well, I mean, there's only just so many people you can put on a podcast, so yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Okay.
They have to represent.
No, that's it. I guess now I'm just wondering, like, I wonder if is it just that they're just not as vocal about it, or maybe it's just not the world I'm running in, and
why
I don't see it. Now I'm fascinated. Anyway, sorry, we were talking politics, being depressed about COVID.
Here's the thing,
and
Maura.
I just want to talk about porn, and
why don't you just indulge us all and post the boobiest shot you can just to entertain us with the comments? No,
that's quite a. It almost worked, Pete.
Well, I didn't ask that. My producer suggested that. I'm not a
Tell
dirtbag.
your dad no.
Dad, Jesus. He just asked if he could listen in on this one conversation, and apparently you knew. All right, that was really fun departure. I didn't know where I was going to go next. I was going to go to something too heady, too serious. So I'm glad we went there because that's more interesting, anyways. And I'm sure a lot of people found it thrilling, and we would love to know what you think, right? I mean, like whatever they think, tweet us on that one. Of course. Maura Quint, thank you. Stand up. And there she goes, Maura Quint on Twitter at Behind Your Back. Ain't she great? Hilarious, thoughtful, original, always unique. I love the filter that she looks at life through, her moral compass, and hearing her point of view on everything. And always hilarious, too. At Behind Your Back on Twitter. Go follow her and thank her for joining me, as well as Claire Potter at Tenured Radical. Thank her, too. And don't forget to check out Truebill, truebill.com/standup. To all of you who support the show with a paid subscription, you are the greatest. Thank you so much. If you haven't already, check out Stand Up with Pete BulwarkRadio.com. Subscribe to all the social media there. Write a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also listen to the show on YouTube if any of those apps don't work. And if you're a subscriber and you listen on the Patreon app, don't, because I need numbers on the other apps. It does not count that. The host doesn't count it. Long story. If you can, try to listen to it on Spotify, YouTube, or iTunes, or any of the other podcast apps that it's on. Google, Amazon, I think. Okay. Thank you very much. I love you all. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll taking us out. Dr. Peter Hotez should be here tomorrow. And I think I'll be playing basketball player, former college and pro superstar, and social activist Eton Thomas, who has a new book out. Dr. Peter Hotez, Eton Thomas. Sounds like a pretty good show to me. Now, John Carroll, please sing us out, my brother.
Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand